Good morning and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Safety Action Safety Update for April. Joined with me today is Andrea Rowe, joining us from out at a client site. Welcome Andrea as well.
Good morning, Gary, and thanks everyone for joining today.
Yep, thanks. Today what we're going to look at, our main topic is safety signage. And there's just a couple little things we want to share with you that might help you review your safety signage, as you may have. Even in office areas, we have a little bit, and sometimes elsewhere we have safety signage as well, whether it be in car parks, warehousing areas, logistics, or operational areas that you may have. There are some new requirements for Silica awareness training in the ACT. The Commonwealth WorkSafe has issued a variation to allow reinstallation of engineered stone bench tops. So the current ban means if they're taken out, they're not to be put back in. So there's a little twist here. So they're allowing something. And we're just going to touch on our safety leadership course as well. So they're the key things we're going to cover this morning. So let's just jump in and do a question of the week first. So I like to provide you with some thought-stimulating questions to kick off our usual safety webinar. So my question one today, Andrea will know the answer to this, but we won't give it to you immediately. I'm sure Andrea does know. How long must you be in your car lane before changing lane again? So it was posed to me, if I'm on a freeway with maybe 3 or 4 lanes, maybe even 5 lanes wide, how many lanes can you cross at any one time? Or do you have to cross into one lane, stop, and how long must you wait before you then go to the next lane? There's the question. We'll come back to this near at the end of the session. I've actually got 3 questions today. So my second question is, are health and safety representatives, we often call HSRs, and maybe add safety committee members to that as well, are they liable for the advice that they may choose to give to the business? Because it may not always be correct. So what if we give advice and it turns out to be wrong and it's cost the company money? We must replace all of our ladders that don't have an Australian standard sticker on it, and that's the statement, maybe from the safety committee, and it costs the company thousands of dollars because they disposed of perfectly safe ladders but didn't have the Australian standard sticker on it. And if that's the advice they gave, are they liable for that loss? And the third question for you to think about as before we go through our webinar today is, do you have the right to enter your neighbour's property to complete construction of an adjoining building, or possibly, I think a fence would be the most common structure we'd have on the boundary, and you might need to get to the other side onto the neighbour's property to nail on planks or to help set a hole or foundation. So there we go. Not fully workplace safety, but gee, it comes up a bit, we find. So there we go. 3 questions to think about. But let's go through our key topics for the day. And is your safety signage correct? So Andrea, have you ever noticed going into businesses a huge variation in the appearance and format of signage?
Yeah, I do often find the signage, being familiar with the Australian standards, we do often find that it's not consistent
Yes.
with the Australian standards. And I think partly, if you don't know what you're looking for when you go to buy a sign, it's actually very easy to buy an incorrect sign
Yes.
online, which it might be from overseas, so it might
Yes.
meet overseas standards, or it just might be from a supplier that hasn't prepared the signage in accordance with our standards. Yeah, so we do, even now that it's more easy to buy things cheaper and easy online, I'm seeing it actually more often.
Yeah. So I think people act in good faith, and we see them try and pack everything they can think of into signage, and they certainly don't want people to be injured. So we have these sometimes appropriate signs and sometimes inappropriate. So taking your point there, Andrea, what I've just summarised here, which might be helpful visually. So first, regulatory action. It could be a blue and white sign. So we want you to wear certain PPE, and the one image shown here would be hearing protection. You could have eye protection and similar. So they'll typically be round, blue and white, mandatory action. The other type of mandatory action is when you want somebody not to do something, and that's typically the red and white, as example here is no entry. And I think most people would understand that. The second category, hazard warning, and we find, Andrea, I'm sure you do as well, probably the most confused. I think the mandatory action, regulatory action is clearer and used well. I think emergency information, we now know is typically green and white. We used to have first aid often as red and white, but we now understand that's reserved for fire and emergency evacuation type signage, so fire services. But the hazard warning is the one I find that has probably the most confused. So let's have a look. So the signage here, I've got danger, hot surface, do not touch. Eminently sensible, but I've got a cross against it. And the next one I've got caution, hot surface, do not touch, and I've got a tick. Bear with me, it's my sense of humour, Andrea. I think you know this from a long period of time. On the right-hand side at the top, the dog on a skateboard, smoking and drinking. So does that
I was going to say, what's wrong with that one?
It's my sense of humour, so bear with me, folks. Does this mean dogs are not allowed to skateboard while smoking and drinking, or dogs are not allowed to skateboard while they're drinking or smoking? So is it and or? So let's just have a look at the more serious aspects of the hazard warning. So when do we use danger and when do we use caution? And the Australian standards make it quite clear. You use danger if it is life-threatening, and we use caution for lesser risks. So what we've observed here on the right, the first one, danger, hot surface, typically is not likely to be life-threatening. It might even result in a serious burn, but typically not life-threatening. And so therefore, we should be using the caution. So why is this important? If we use danger everywhere, we're going to devalue life-threatening situations. And I think, Andrea, while you were away recently, I did one of the site inspections for you at an electrical substation. And clearly, if you go into a high voltage substation work area, the risk is death. If anyone comes into contact or even approaches high voltage where the arcs can jump across to individuals, Andrew. So you work with this more often than I do, and we want to preserve that awareness of danger, life-threatening, and so we don't want to overuse the word danger. So the first thing we'd caution you, and all the listeners and readers of our newsletter, don't desensitize people to workplace hazards, and think carefully about, is this really a danger sign or should it be caution? So there you go, hazard warning. So let's, so there's now a couple of other bits to it. And there are three key parts. Number one, is it life-threatening, danger or caution? Two, then state what the hazard is. So in this example here, caution, wet floor. And you might even say slippery, wet floor. And then advise what the precaution is. And so in this one, maybe caution or wet, slippery floor, walk slowly, and maybe a bit of a joke, walk like a penguin. I've seen this recently. It sounds a bit strange, walk like a penguin, but you know how they walk with very short steps. And so if you're in an area with a slippery floor, particularly in say a freezer, it may be a funny thing, but it might be that prompt for the memory. That's how we should walk across the icy floor. So just remember, three key parts for hazard warning signage. One, danger or caution. Tell us what the hazard is. and then tell us what you want me to do about it. And obviously the key precaution. So we often find that the actual precautions are missing, and we're just leaving people to work it out. I guess that's the bare minimum, but it would be nice if we follow the process. Danger or caution, what is that hazard, and then what is it you want me to do about it? And so that makes the correct structure of a signage, hazard warning signage in the workplace. There's two key Australian standards around colours and shapes, and to some extent the wording. So AS 1319 is on safety signs, shapes and colours. You'll see that on the left there. And on the right, pipe identification and colours. And so particularly in factory and warehouse areas, we might have piping and conduits conveying either gases or liquids throughout the facility, and some of them may have a hazard associated with them. And so just so you know, it's more than just colour and name on the pipes. For example, section 9.1 of that Australian Standard 1345 says to repeat the pipe signage at wall penetrations and at least every 8 metres. And I'm sure, Andrea, you found as well that somebody may well have done it at the valve or somewhere on the pipe, but it doesn't tend to get repeated every 8 metres or at wall penetrations. Have you found that, Andrea? I see that they do it once in good faith.
Pipeline markers is one that I often find does get missed. And so, just recently I was at a site where there was a pipe coming outside the building with a valve. And I said to the building manager, I think we need to organise some labelling of the pipelines. And they said, well, I don't know what that is. What is it anyway? Is it gas? Is it water? I said, well, that's why we need to label the pipelines so that we know what that valve is in fact for. So that's important. The colours I find are less frequently used now. It's more often the stickers. And just a hint, if you're looking around your site and they do have those pipeline stickers, something I find is often forgotten is when the contractors buy those stickers, they have an arrow on both ends. And we should have put one in here today, Gary. The purpose of those arrows is to show the direction of flow of the liquid or gas moving through that pipeline. So when you buy the sticker, it has an arrow on both ends. The intention is that you cut one of those off to actually show the direction. We frequently show that the contractor's forgotten to cut one end off, so it just has the arrows at both ends. So look out for that.
Thanks, Andrew. That's a good point. I was going to mention it's good practice to have the arrows, and people won't necessarily colour the whole piping either in the green or the blue or the white, but at least on the sticker it'll have the background of that colour that you've got there. Although some people do paint all fire service piping red, for example, to show this is for the fire sprinkler system, but the standard doesn't require that. At least in the marking you'll have red background, and as you say, Andrea, the arrow to give direction as well. So good advice. And the key standards that we've largely demonstrated here, AS 1318, which is the colour code, safety colour code, AS 1319, workplace safety signs, so that's the key one, AS 1319. AS 1345 is the one we've just shown you for the contents of pipes. All three of these are relatively old, but are still current and are on the Australian Standards website to purchase and use. We can use ISO standards if you desire, and these are more recent, which is the colour marking for physical hazards, ISO 7010 and ISO 20559, safety signs and colours. They're consistent with our Australian standards, but the current Australian standards may have some specific aspects for Australia, so you might be able to merge those in. And we suggest you conduct an annual safety sign survey, because if safety signage forms part of your safety system and part of your safety standards, you need to maintain them. And I found on many occasions faded signs, particularly that are outdoors, or being subject to some chemicals or steam or whatever that are totally faded and unreadable. And so if it forms part of your safety system, though whatever safety signage you've got there needs to be one readable, and that is a hedge hasn't grown up in front of it and we can't see it or read it, also faded or unreadable, or indeed out of date, not relevant anymore. So have you found clients typically doing annual surveys, Andrew, or is it informal as part of inspection programs?
Mike was not on. Yeah, look, it used to be something that under previous audit systems, so for example, the National Audit Tool, which was more popular in Australia, 10 or so years ago, it was a criteria to have a sign audit or sign survey for a site, and that you regularly reviewed that. Now that it's not built into like AS 45001, as signage survey is not a prescribed thing in that certified audit system. So I see some businesses dropping off from doing that. But what I would encourage you to do is at least, so the benefit of the survey is that you could tell if a sign had gone missing completely, because your register, essentially your sign register, told you that you should have a sign in that location, and now it's gone. However, at least if you do include checking your signage in your regular site safety inspections, at least you will pick up if something is deteriorated. Signage is out in the sun. It does fade, it does fall down and wear out. So at least you can maintain what the signage that you do have. My view is that keeping signs clear and readable is not just about, looking good. It actually, if the sign is faded, I often wonder whether they're still relevant.
Yeah.
By keeping them in good condition, it actually shows the people that are meant to be following that sign that it is a current and relevant sign that they do still need to be obeying.
Yeah, I see Rick here says, I see signs with the word hazard on it. Are they okay, or should it say caution? I'll have a go at that if you like, Andrew, and you can correct me. The standard actually refers to the word warning or caution. But I think in Australia, we're very comfortable with both, and either can be, I believe, can be used. So if somebody said,
in fact,
yeah, sorry, Andrew.
I was just going to remind you, Gary, they don't actually have to say the word warning or caution at all. If they are of that yellow format with the black writing, it means it is a warning or caution sign. But yeah, I think I would be okay with either.
I like adding the word caution or warning. So if somebody had hazard, I think it'd at least make people stop and think. But it's not in the standard as one of the words. But I don't think anyone would be offended or think that's terribly wrong if we've actually said there is a hazard here, because it is a hazard warning sign, and we're deciding is it danger or caution or danger or warning. And if somebody put hazard, probably the only confusion is it's a hazard warning. I don't know now, does that mean life-threatening? But your colouring might. So the yellow and wording would be caution or hazard, warning. And the black, red, and white is the danger sign. So hopefully that helps, Rick. Is that reasonably correct, Andrea?
Yeah, agreed, Gary. So I think, the format of the sign is what really guides us to whether it's telling us of a danger hazard or a warning or caution hazard. That's fine.
Yeah. So I don't think a major need to change it, but I think moving forward, I think I'd prefer the proper format as outlined in the standard, and I prefer the word, we either use danger along with the shape and the colorings, and if it's a warning or caution, I think that'd be preferred, because the word hazard could mean one or the other and we're not sure, but the coloring would probably tell us. Okay, let's continue. Now, probably enough on safety signage. We had just a few tips there, and as Andrew said, worthwhile including it in your inspection program and standards, or as I think, an annual or biannual safety sign survey. And if people need, sometimes our team do that for some of our clients, and we can give you a quote. So let's turn our mind to silica awareness. So many of us have heard of crystalline silica, dust, and it has caused very serious and sometimes fatal illnesses often for young tradies who are working in good faith on engineered stone. So they may be cutting holes in it, sanding it down, grinding, and this has created the dust that they've breathed in. So it's similar exposure, if you like, to if you had an asbestos bench. And we've long known about asbestos dust and the dangers of that, and that we should obviously not be exposed to it. And asbestos has been long banned in Australia as well, but we have the history in many buildings of, for example, AC sheeting, asbestos cement sheeting on roofs, walls, interior, tiles, and underneath tiles and insulation. So there's a variety of areas. Of more recent years, engineered stone has been very popular for bench tops, bathrooms, kitchens, and a variety of other areas. So this has now been banned, so we can't import it. We can't engineer new engineered bench tops, but we've got a lot of, once again, like asbestos, history where it's been installed. And the ban basically up until, we'll go to the ACT, have now introduced a specific silica awareness training. So for any, essentially any of the building and construction workers, and the list is quite complete. So this includes handymen doing just ad hoc jobs in your home. They're required, if they work in the ACT, Australian Capital Territory, to have completed the silica awareness training. It's approximately $375 for a half-day course, we understand. Some unions may be running this, and for members may offer that for free or subsidised. But if workers are doing what's now described as not only just working with engineered stone, but doing what's described as high-risk silica work, they have to complete a formal vet course, and I've got the designation of it here. So it's under the National Accreditation System for Training Courses, although I'm told this may also be combined with an asbestos awareness in the same course. So silica and asbestos, and of course the mechanisms are the same. What we've got to do is prevent people breathing the dust from asbestos and crystalline silica, engineered stone. So there you go. If you've got anybody doing any works that might involve crystalline silica in ACT, they need to have that awareness training. And the one that overlaps this was in fact from the Commonwealth. Comcare has issued an interim class exemption from the ban on engineered stone, and that is they can be reinstalled. So if they've been taken out of a workplace, it could be a kitchen in a work area or in a domestic home. Previously, they were not allowed to be reinstalled. So once you've taken it out, you can't reinstall it. So what they've understood is sometimes very expensive, valuable engineered benchtop, stone benchtops taken out, for example, merely to gain access underneath or some other repairs underneath the benchtops. And in that circumstance, they're allowed to be replaced if it's in the same location at the same address. You have to notify the regulator and obviously follow the safe and compliant practices for working with engineered stone. So there's, if you like, a small exemption, but I think a credit to the Commonwealth Comcare, they haven't they've actually recognised the difficulty and the wastage of not allowing an engineered benchtop to be taken off for work to be carried out under and then to be put back in place. And they've recognised the risk is low. It'd be very wasteful and costly for businesses and homeowners. And so they've, without other pressure, have brought this exemption forward themselves. We'll have to wait and see if each state follows through with the same exemption. So this is at the moment would cover ACT and federal controlled workplaces, which would be Defence Department, things like Reserve Bank, and other federal government department areas will be covered by Comcare. And so the other states hopefully will follow through with their own interim class exemption for this. So turning to machinery safety, back to you, Andrea. Can you tell us, you told me two key things, and I'll just bring it up and you can tell me a bit of detail first about this study that they reported at the conference.
Yeah, so next, this conference is specifically about machinery safety in Rome, held at the Italian, essentially the Italian WorkSafe headquarters, but run by ISA, an international organization, the machinery safety section. So, and it was highly focused on, scientific research and papers and a lot, and really focused on new and innovative technology. So I learned a lot about how artificial intelligence programs can be used to prevent accidents. And just for your information, the researchers found that they believe the use of artificial intelligence can prevent 50% of accidents by monitoring devices, videos that can detect people possibly entering dangerous areas, warn before collisions, warn the lack of PPE, that kind of thing. So really interesting stuff, but I'll talk about that more next week. What I wanted to share straight away was about machinery safeguards. So Gary and myself have done, hundreds of risk assessments on machinery all around the world, and we continue to find startling finds that about safeguards. So, for example, interlocked doors on machinery, which which should stop the machine when you open the door. So really protecting the operators. We found a lot of cases where these were defeated. So by using sticky tape or, incorrectly using the prongs or other devices to deliberately defeat a safeguard, which puts the operators at risk of, being caught or crushed in machinery. And so I continue to have faith and think that this is going away, that this problem is getting reduced by higher tech devices. But recent research done in Germany found that a quarter of machinery had a defeat in it. So, if we're talking a production line or something like that, a quarter of them had one component or more defeated. So one door was defeated. And their research also found that 10% of machinery had a permanent safeguard defeated.
Yeah. So, Andrea, the thing that worried me, that what you told me added to what you're just telling us, what really worried me was with full knowledge of the supervisor. So not only were they defeated, as you've said, but with knowledge of the supervisor. And I would have thought,
correct. So
wow.
Half of the defeating. So the research found that half of the machinery safeguards that were defeated, that situation was known or tolerated by the supervisors, and possibly even put in place by a manager or supervisor. So some key messages here is, that management really need to be aware of the consequences of defeating these safeguards so that they can actually, really lead and behave like managers, protecting their staff. We have to have faith in people and think that they truly just don't understand the danger that they're putting their workers at.
Indeed, and as you know, I'll come to our safety leadership training shortly, which will cover that. Now, just briefly for time, because we're coming up to our time end, you mentioned something about emerging trend of cyber attacks. Can you just briefly, I know you'll elaborate more next month, but just briefly on that.
Well, it's certainly a fear. And, what we know is that basically any device that's connected to a network, and we find increasingly machinery and automated mobile plant are actually connected to a network, which means that there's a potential for a cyber attack. So that somebody from outside the organization, whether they can do it, remotely from overseas, from another country, or whether they can actually do it from being like within your network zone. So for example, just outside the perimeter of your site, hack into your software and take control of your equipment. A percentage of these potential cyber attacks are believed to be dangerous. So some of them, they might be able to take control of the machine, but it's believed up to a quarter of machinery that could be potentially hacked into could pose a safety danger and harm people.
Thanks very much for that quick summary, Andrea.
So just to be mindful of that, and you need to put in measures to prevent that being possible if you have networked machinery.
We look forward to your more detailed article in our next month's newsletter, and obviously our next webinar, and you can take us through some of those other very interesting findings and emerging trends with machinery safety. So thanks for that, Andrea. So as I did mention, I was worrying that a lot of that machinery had been defeated with knowledge of the supervisor. Does every supervisor understand one of their prime duties and obligations is to ensure safe operation and compliance of their equipment? If you think they don't, then consider booking one or more of your supervisors or managers or yourself into our safety leadership course. Our next one's coming up on the 11th and 12th of June, and the early bird runs to the end of this month. So we've still got a couple of weeks of the early bird fee if you're interested. So before we finish, let's just, because our time's nearly up, how long must you be in your car lane before you change lane? So I looked up the Australian road rules, and rule number 47.2 says the words, the driver must give the change of direction signal for long enough to give sufficient warning to other drivers. So it would suggest you can't just merge across multiple lanes all at once because you haven't given sufficient warning for the next change and the next change. And I've noticed a rule of thumb from driver training organisations. They, I believe, are telling their learners, indicate with your blinker for at least 3 seconds prior to lane change. So there's a nice rule of thumb. So the law says you must give sufficient warning. How the police would exercise that, I don't know. But I think the first bit of guidance here is about 3 seconds. And I think you and I would like 3 seconds warning before a car started to move across. So there's a good starting point. You may come across some other information. That's the law. There's, I think, the best rule of thumb, easy answer that I can give you at the moment. So are health and safety representatives and liable for the advice they may give? I think most of you might already know this one. The answer is no. So in Victoria, health and safety reps have no duties. If you look up the Act, they have rights, things they can do or may do, but there's nothing they're required to do. So they're not even required to attend safety committee meetings. They're not required to do inspections. They're not required to do acts investigations, but they may and typically do those things. So when you don't have a duty at law, you can't be liable when you don't do any of that, or even when you give advice. So without a duty under the Act, they can't be held liable for it. So as long as they act in good faith with whatever they do, that they believe this is good and helpful, then they're not liable. And outside of Victoria, Section 66 of the WHS Act provides specific immunity if they act in good faith. So there's the component there. And because we're just running short of time, I'll just follow through to, can you enter your neighbour's property, say to build a fence? It's just out of practicality. I need to step over there and nail some planks on. So normally it's not a problem. If you've got a reasonable relationship with your neighbour, you would agree to have a fence built or to build it yourselves, and normal common courtesy, that's what you would do. However, if you come to a legal point of view, a building permit for, say, a building that comes up to the boundary does not give any specific rights to enter or use someone else's property. And also, if you cause nuisance or damage, you could be liable to abate that nuisance or possibly to pay compensation. So if you do go onto the neighbour's property, just be careful you don't cause any damage that may arise. And you may need to plan how to complete the structure from your own property. So major commercial buildings, no, they may have to work out how to construct their building from within their own property boundary, even though their property may go up to the boundary. So that brings us to the end today. Thank you once again, Andrea, for assisting us, and particularly those interesting points on the conference you attended on machinery safety. And we look forward to hearing more about that next month. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I hope you found it both of some interest and of value for you and your team. So we look forward to seeing you next month. And our next safety webinar is Friday, the 9th of May. So we look forward to seeing you then. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great Easter and see you next time.
Yes, indeed. Have a great Easter, everyone. Thank you.